And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of, well, hundreds of thousands of stories. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition Radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us, where you can find links to our civil liberties page, our YouTube page, our podcast page. We're pleased, after a kind of a back and forth over the last few months now, we're listed on everyone from iHeart to Spreaker and of course to Spotify. We'll make it to the big time on iTunes soon. This show has been on the air for almost 7 years, in a variety of formats. In its earliest days, and it's what we call Coalition 1.0, the digital format, we were on AM radio, first on AM 790, then WPRO, the Big 630. Over the past 2 years or so, we've made the migration to a digital physical format, where through the miracle of Skype and desktop technology, and as well as the ability to view the show via handheld appliances, we've been able to expand our audience significantly. But at the same time, we've never shied away from some of the more challenging subjects that we face as society. And over the 7 years, I'd like to say that we've made progress on a number of them. I'm not sure that's true, though. One of the key issues that we've focused on since the inception of this show has been, well, the war on, and fill in the blank. Early on, we focused on the war on drugs, but we became quickly aware of another challenge to our culture, if you will, and that's the war on sex and the war on sex workers. We've documented it carefully, I think with a degree of insight and maturity brought to us really by our guests, whose focus, whether it be as an ally, whether it be an active member of the sex worker community, as an academic, the occasional lawmaker who has been sensitive to and cognizant of the issues surrounding what seems to be an issue still difficult to discuss in the body politic. So again, we face another December 17th, an international day to recognize and to make war on, if you will, the violence that's levied against sex workers and around the planet. It's sadly not just an intellectual violence, it's sadly not just a rhetorical violence, it's a physical violence as well. And when I say where the progress has been scarce, it's not because of the spirit and the intelligence and the perspective of the community itself. Unfortunately, we live in a time when science and education and truth seem to be in question at so many different levels, and where, incredibly enough, our own government here in our country routinely fails us by yielding to the demands of the few and being willing to sacrifice the many. This international observance was started really back, I guess, in 2003 as a reaction to the Seattle, Washington Green River Killers. And since then, as recently as the last few weeks, we have been made aware of cases of violence directed at people who use sexuality in a commercial, consensual relationship and offer nothing but themselves to people. They offer no violence, no fraud, and yet seemingly our civil forces here in this country continue to deny them the dignity, the safety, and the support that they so richly deserve, as well any member of society would. They are, in fact, continue to be marginalized. And yet, heroically, these folks in this community, whether they be male, female, trans, cis, fill in the labels, him, her, they continue to warrior on in some of those difficult circumstances imaginable. So tonight we're going to spend a couple hours catching up with some folks that we've had the good fortune of chatting with in the past, bringing them up to speed on the current state of the issues, understanding the different roles that they've all taken. And these are folks who come from ordinary backgrounds. We'll talk about that and how they came to, well, to be such heroes. Someone who is clearly fills that title, who should wear that honor proudly is our next guest. She now officially qualifies as a repeat offender to the coalition. She's joined us on a couple of occasions. She is, of course, Alex Andrews. She is with Swap Behind Bars, which is an outgrowth, if you will, an affiliate of the Sex Worker Outreach Project. Alex, welcome back to the coalition, and
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us tonight in this observance. Let's start from scratch because we have time, and that's always the challenge, isn't it? Let's start from scratch. Talk to us about to what degree you're comfortable, your own engagement in sex worker rights, how you became to be involved in such a powerful figure in a sense and when I say powerful, I want to qualify that. When I say powerful, I mean someone who has clearly laid out a code of behavior and a mechanism for which people can support others in their most direst circumstances. And you've done this consistently for years now. So, and then just give us an insight into what Swap Behind Bars is.
Well, you know what they say, Pat, is he who gets the grief. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Swap Behind Bars is a sex worker-led organization that works to communicate with people who are behind prison walls. We have several thousand members who are or have been incarcerated. Recently started providing reentry services and materials to some of these folks as they're getting out of prison, and we're offering Amazon book lists and mentor by mail pen pal program. We just work really, really hard to make sure that the voices of those people who are locked up get a chance to speak out and tell us what it is they need.
What type of geographic scope do you have in terms of Swap Behind Bars?
Swap Behind Bars works within the U.S. right now, but we're pretty consistently brought in to consult in an international. We've had a lot of folks from the U.K. that we've talked to. We've talked to a lot of folks from Canada because there they actually have the Swedish model. We've talked to folks in New Zealand where sex work can be criminalized. We've even talked to some folks in Australia where there's these spots there where sex work is decriminalized.
So the common motivation is that you've got folks who have been incarcerated for and I always hate to use the word victimless crime because in most of these cases there's no victim and there's no crime. But that's the common parlance, if you will. That's what society uses, victimless crime. These folks find themselves in the worst possible circumstances internationally because outside of a handful of outposts is really, and despite international intervention by a number of worldwide peacekeeping groups, if you will, we continue to face the same circumstances, don't we?
Well, sex workers are being hunted right now. The war on sex workers has become worse over the past 2 years, especially since the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, or FOSTA, was enacted. We've had all kinds of police departments who are getting federal dollars to run what they call human trafficking stings, which are really nothing more than just efforts to pick up sex workers and their clients. Very few, they go on TV and they brag about how they ran this human trafficking sting and they found this many victims, but then they will also kind of leave as a follow-up, oh, and yes, we did find some people who were prostituting themselves. We find these kind of stings to be violent in and of themselves. We don't need law enforcement lording over our bodies and what we do. I've always been a very strong believer in bodily autonomy, and that means that as a woman, I have the right to do with my body as I like. That doesn't mean you have to like it. That doesn't mean anybody else has to like it. It just means that I know what's best for me. And I believe that is, sex work should be recognized as a labor issue. There are a lot of people who don't like their jobs. That doesn't mean that they don't go do them anymore. They say that the highest suicide rate is among dentists, but we don't see anybody out there looking to rescue dentists. So I think that it's parody. It's almost like they're doing it because it's an easy target. We're low hanging fruit.
You're literally the individual who runs an organization that's at the intersection, if you will, of recent federal policy changes, legal changes, FOSTA-SESTA, and the impact that it's had. You see it literally in the flesh. How bad has it? How bad has FOSTA and SESTA effectively not only put sex workers at risk, but also effectively increased the level of incarceration? And what impact has it had on just the overall scope of the community that's now incarcerated?
FOSTA has been a disaster. I don't even think that there's any question of that. There's a bill that has been introduced by Elizabeth Warren in the Senate that is asking for a study of the effects of FOSTA. That's only been launched within the last couple of days. They're looking to study what the real impact has been. We know as sex workers, and we told them this before this happened, but before they passed the law, that this wasn't going to end sex trafficking. It was just going to make it more invisible. Sex workers were basically kicked off the internet. We had sued the United States federal government with Woodhull, Sexual Freedom Foundation. We've bound together with the ACLU, with the Human Rights Campaign, and with many other organizations to fight this law and get it repealed. I found out about the closure of Backpage while I was sitting in a drive-through restaurant with a young lady who was actually staying in a hotel, and she went on Backpage to go list an ad to go post an ad, and page was gone, and she literally became homeless in that moment as I sat with her.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen an increase in incarceration as a result of this?
We've seen an increase in stings. I'm in Florida, as you know, and I'm sure that everyone heard about the massage parlor stings that were down here with a very famous football team owner.
Yes, we have.
They went on TV. They advertised. They talked about this massive international criminal ring that they brought down. Through their hard efforts of, watching the world's most boring porn over a 3-month period. They went on TV and they bragged about this, bringing down this human trafficking ring. Come to find out there was no human trafficking. Many of the charges have already been thrown out. But what was left was the women. The women did not get to go free. Some of them were held until they actually went to trial. They've taken away their massage license so they can no longer practice their crafts. We find it ironic that they want to end trafficking and they want them to do something else, but they're going to take away the very tool that which they were able to make a living.
Right. So so now you've got the specter of federal legislation pushing people, and the analogy to abortion and the right to choice can't be missed. The presidential candidate you just spoke of, fiercely defends, I believe rightfully, the right to a woman's domain over her own body and her own reproductive rights. Yet, do you think it's perhaps the political pressure of a presidential campaign that is making her, face, if you will, the music, the hypocrisy of her support of legislation that rips away that same choice from women?
So many of these feminists are such hypocrites. They go around talking about bodily autonomy and that women should have the choice to have an abortion, but they shouldn't have the choice to trade sex. And I find that just the most hypocritical thing that you can possibly imagine. Here in Florida, Senator Lauren Book actually posted something on Twitter about how all women should have bodily autonomy and the right to choose, unless you don't like my choice. And the hypocrisy is just infuriating.
Right.
And it's from national now. A lot of the feminist organizations have just absolutely insisted that no woman could possibly choose to trade sex, and we know that that's not true. We know for a fact that through evidence-based studies, we know that that's not true. We also know that where sex trafficking is happening, 91% of sex trafficking victims report having an interaction with law enforcement and having a criminal record, which means that they can't rent an apartment, they can't buy a car, they can't get an education, they can't get financial aid. the system isn't working. The system isn't working, and it's all about control over women's bodies. In the past year, there have been 18 legislative decisions that were made that control women's bodies, mostly around the issue of abortion. There have been zero legislative moves to control men's bodies. So I think that it only takes, you only have to wake up just for a very short time to see the hypocrisy in the rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I said in the past, and someone pointed this out to me this week, they've literally turned choice into a dirty word. It's
yeah.
Is the sex worker rights movement in a position, do you think, given all the challenges they faced, to have an impact, if you will, in this presidential election?
It's really interesting. Sex work has been talked about in the presidential level for quite some time. Tulsi Gabbard immediately, almost upon entry, came out in support of sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
When asked about sex workers, many of the candidates said, well, they didn't know, or they'd have to hear more. They needed to further understand what the issue was. Yes, sex work is going to have an impact in the election this year. We are mobilizing our people to register to vote. We are working to help make sure that they get to polling stations. And we're doing this all at a grassroots level. All it's community organizations interact with other community organizations to reach the people who can make the difference.
Let's talk about incarceration. What level of incarceration do sex workers usually find themselves in? I mean, we've got this mental image if we've watched that show on HBO, or if we've, or we've kind of responded to popular culture that the wagon comes in and rounds people up, and they're out the next morning somehow unscathed, ready to start the brand new day. We know that quite frankly is a myth. It's a serious myth that I think needs to be dispelled of right now. What type of criminal charges have many of your correspondents faced, and what level and time of incarceration are they dealing with?
Our membership is made up of people who have traded sex at some point in time in their life. We don't necessarily insist that they are in prison or jail for a sex work or sex trafficking related offense. We have a lot of, I would say probably 50% or more are actually in a state prison for drug charges. And that, of course, domestic violence. We have about, I would say 20% of our members are in federal prisons on federal charges of sex trafficking. We've had several young ladies who were charged with sex trafficking, a minor, when they were minors themselves, when they started engaging in the sex trade. They've been exploited. And so all they knew was to exploit others. So, it's a very, I would say probably 80% of our members are in state prison, many of them for drug charges. We do have women who are in state prison for violent charges, for murder, that are even facing life sentences. And there is, without question, in the beginning of their life, some sort of violent act that they've been exposed to. And that, in combination with a lot of other things, has landed them in prison. And it's really tough to see some of them really struggle to make a life for themselves in prison.
Right. So very often the pathway to the prison, or the prison pipeline, is being caught up in ancillary charges as a result of having been involved at some point in sex work. Is it a pattern of entrapment, do you think?
It's kind of like, is it the chicken or the egg? I don't think necessarily that sex work leads to incarceration. But I think that sex work is on the path to incarceration in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. When you're trading sex, and when you're young, or when you're making decisions that may not always be the best ones, sometimes you come up against challenges. No, I don't think sex work results in incarceration. I think violence results in incarceration. I think a lot of folks are exposed to violence when they're young in a domestic situation, whether it be a parent. They're exposed to a lot of that, and I think maybe that might be some of the catalyst for why they end up in prison. And it does seem that sometimes sex work is on that pathway to prison, but I don't think that it's the cause of incarceration.
Have you ever attempted to sort of get a statistic, if you will, of how many folks end up in jail because of active participation in sex work? Or
we have heard that 70%, and we have not been able to confirm this number, so this is not something that has been researched or studied, but there's so very little about incarcerated women that has been researched and studied that, it's really difficult to tell. We have heard rumors that there is a number right around 70 to 72% of women who are incarcerated who have also had experience in trading sex. I think that a lot of that is because our largest incarcerated population are poor people. So I think that number, there's a good chance that number could be correct. If it is correct, I think that that's really a high number, and I think we need to pay really close attention to that. SWAT Behind Bars is right in the middle of a study right now on it's a vital projects study, and we're studying the impact of violence of people who are in prison, and we're looking for people who have been incarcerated and also experienced or have been charged with prostitution or sex trafficking charges, and finding out really what their kind of is, and find out where we can find the common thread where they interact.
if you're just joining us, Alex Andrews is live via the Miracle of Skype. She is with SWAP, Sex Workers Outreach Project, Behind Bars. They maintain an active, I'll call it a ministry, to folks around the country and to a degree around the world who've been incarcerated, for whom sex life may have been part of or not part of their road pathway, if you will, their personal journey to landing, and if you will, being part of America's penal system. What are some of the conditions that these folks face? I mean, you've got a couple of different issues here. Originally, incarceration was supposed to be meant towards not just punishment, but quote-unquote rehabilitation, where folks would be offered life skills, offered, again, a pathway, perhaps a way to break out of this sort of cycle. At the same time, you've got folks who are engaged in sex work as a personal choice. So you've got that sort of that dichotomy. At the same time, you've got the physical condition of a lot of these folks. Some of these folks were engaged in survival sex. There is, there is HIV, and some of the physical challenges that some of these folks are facing. Overall, from your personal perspective, what is the quality of life for these people beyond the obvious that they're being jailed against their will?
Yeah, there is more information coming about this, about the conditions of women's prisons. There's more information coming to the surface. There's less. They're able to hide a lot less. The system has been. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. We've had stories of women who have been experiencing incarceration, who have been beaten by prison guards, rape, sexual exploitation. A lot of that has been taking place. It's a horrible place. There was a story just a few weeks ago here in Florida, the Lowell Women's Prison. Some guards had thrown a woman to the ground, beat her. She was already having mental challenge, and she is now a paraplegic. So the violence continues inside the prison.
Right. No respite, no peace, no safety. You're a fugitive on the streets from your own government, sometimes from your own community, and then when you're incarcerated, when they finally catch you up in the trap, again, no safety, no peace. Mm-hmm. Talk about, if you will, and I know that you've got a case involvement right now with woman who is in advanced stages of breast cancer. Talk about health care that women have access to.
Yeah, Helen was actually trafficked at the age 14. She was exploited by a parent. She went to prison on an arson charge because and she had had two teenagers. She was accused of having two teenagers commit arson. She's been in prison since 1999. She had been trading commercial sex as a young adult. After her sentence was imposed, she's got very poor medical care. About 6 months ago, she went to a doctor to try and find out if the lump in her breast was anything, and it took almost 6 months to get her in to have all of the testing done to come find out that she's got stage 4 breast cancer. They moved her to a medical unit, and they say that they're going to be treating her there. Bella Robinson, who I believe is coming up a little bit later in your show today, is actually advocating the prison to make sure that she gets the best medical care they have to offer.
Right. And is that a fairly typical scenario? How often does that happen?
Not getting adequate medical treatment is pretty much normal. The prisons contract with outside contractors who are doing it for the money, and there's not really a lot of money in making sure that you take really good care of someone in prison. And society doesn't much care about people who are in prison and suffering from some sort of illness or disease.
Right. So they've gone from marginalized, threatened, hunted, to incarcerated, to finally, essentially, the medical system within our penal system effectively acts as they finally kill them, just through, time. And this is obviously a problem throughout the entire American prison system. This is not something completely unique, but again, physical challenges are not being met. And so the entire picture here we have is a nation that mobilizes incredible efforts to capture people, to put them in harm's way, capture them, hunt them down, put them in cages, not provide any base physical safety despite being in the care of law enforcement, and on and on and on. So we as a nation spend an enormous amount. Let's forget about the ethical considerations for a moment. We as a nation spend untold millions. It's incalculable what we spend and the resources that we bring to bear to simply hunt people who will engage in a consensual sex act for money, despite the fact that virtually every profession at some level, whether it be physical or mental, asks you to trade your body for commercial gain. I mean, how incredible is that hypocrisy?
Basketball players trade their bodies for money. Football players do.
Right.
You have to physically go to a location a lot of times to work. That is not exploitation, even if you're only making $8 or $10 an hour.
Right.
That's considered exploitation. It's really just a myth that anyone could make a choice to trade sex for money.
Right. On an ongoing basis, and let's get into the services that you provide. Again, pen pals, books, personal products, if you will.
We really believe that the key to intervening into the criminal justice system is information and education. We really believe that the more information people have, the more power they have over their own lives to make different decisions that will not lead to the road to prison. So we're very engaged in making sure that people who are in prison have lots of people to communicate with on the outside. They have reading material that they may use as self-help material, or even just urban fiction or romance or whatever. Reading is important. We provide GED study guides to people who want to study for their GED, but the prison system is overcrowded with people who want to get their GED. So a lot of people just don't have the opportunity to take the classes and get the tutoring. By having their own study guide, they're able to self-study and then they're able to go in and take the test that's given every month or two at the prison, and potentially get their GED certification. That opens up all kinds of new doors for them to go to a different trade school, for them to go do something else, for them to gain new skills. We also provide a paralegal program, paralegal scholarships, where each December 17th we announce a number of scholarships for paralegal training. And that gives them an opportunity to work on behalf of other prisoners in the jail, and it will give them a strong skill that they can market once they get out of prison.
What type of resources do you need to bring to bear this on, and then bring it to scale on a larger level? You rely entirely on donations, don't you?
We do, and the community has always been really generous to SWAT Behind Bars, and we are so grateful. Our scholarships are funded almost entirely through the generosity of others. We are our other programs, we provide cell phones to returning citizens. We provide them with a smartphone so that they can access some of the public services that are available to them, find a food bank, make those food stamp cards that aren't going to be available for very long, worth more money. We do a lot of, we provide them with hygiene items. Sometimes we're able to do care kits to people who are still incarcerated. But I would say that probably our strongest program is the one that requires people to take time out of their day and write a letter.
Right. Now, here again, we're talking about ironies tonight, and again, if you're just joining us, it's a somewhat somber observance, if you will, of an event that's really found its roots way back in 2003 with the Green River Killers in the Seattle, Washington area. And we're talking about an international observance, if you will, a commemoration, a remembrance, if you will, of folks who have suffered extreme violence simply because of their work and self-identification as sex workers. You do this all on private donations, a significant part of which comes from the community itself. Yet ultimately, both the federal government, state and local governments spend enormous amounts of money on quote-unquote intervention organizations. Here in Rhode Island, we have an organization called Day One, which I will never hesitate to call out, who spends an enormous amount of money, has highly compensated individuals running it, and yet really provides little or none of this.
Yeah. Isn't that frustrating?
How bad is the imbalance? Has anyone ever attempted to quantify?
Crazy bad. It's crazy bad.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big comparisons that I often make is SWAT Behind Bars runs a community support line. It's a national line that anybody can call into. We have more than 30 other organizations that are connected through the use of extensions. We get around 40 calls a week, and more than half of those are from the Polaris Human Trafficking Hotline referrals. They have an $11 million a year budget. Our budget for our community support line is $10,000. So yeah, the disparity is huge. Anti-trafficking organizations who are, they are literally living off of our blood. They become more and more successful, raise more and more money, compensate their people, and they don't even consider listening to sex workers or people who have been victimized by someone else.
Right, and so you've actually got the irony, if you will, of you being a free resource to highly compensated organizations.
Yeah, they provide no services whatsoever. No services whatsoever. All they do is connect somebody with another organization, and you don't even get connected to them. They ask you to write down the number, and then you've got to call it. With our system, if somebody calls in and they need help, we're able to directly connect them to that resource, specifically directly, without them having to write down another number, call another thing, tell their whole story again. Our system is so much more efficient, and that's because we have to be.
Right.
We don't have any choice.
And many mental health advocates will tell you that for many folks, it's a major step to make that initial contact.
Oh, yeah.
And then to be shuttled off to someone else to reinitiate that contact has a devastating impact on the percentage of people who actually follow through and receive or at least put out a cry for help for the assistance that they so desperately need. Now, what makes this even worse, and this in here, I'm a libertarian, as you know, and I find great frustration, yet am attracted like a magnet to situations of just sheer government stupidity. One of the aspects of FOSTA and SESTA, that's not discussed as often as it should be, by acting with active sex workers and communicating with them electronically, it's my understanding that you potentially put yourself in a position of, under some of the more obscene aspects of these laws, as being somehow, incredibly enough, being engaged, if you will, in trafficking of itself. How is that possible? You're providing a service that seemingly no one else wants to.
Yeah. Well, and no one else wants to. That's a key. The law was written with so much rhetoric and so vague that nobody really knows how to interpret it. Mm-hmm. The idea behind the law was that people who had been victimized would be able to sue platforms, internet platforms, for their exploitation, for allowing their exploitation to continue. Mm-hmm. But that's one of the reasons why so many sex workers got kicked offline, because so many social media platforms, they couldn't afford the risk that was associated with allowing sex workers to advertise there. They just couldn't afford the attorney. They couldn't afford all of the risks that went along with it. And that's one of the reasons why we have sued the United States government. Lawrence Walters is the lead attorney on this case. The Electronic Frontier Foundation is also supporting the case. Human Rights Campaign, ACLU. Myself, I am a litigant on the case representing sex worker rights advocates, because there is the opportunity of interpreting the law, saying that providing harm reduction services to sex workers, like giving them condoms or providing them with material support, could be considered facilitating prostitution.
Right.
And so you could be charged with trafficking. Now, they swear to God, of course, that that's not what the law was intended to do. But it doesn't matter what the law was intended to do. If any prosecutor can interpret it any way that they want, and if they want to make it, into something, they could.
Right, and there's talk in the community always. There's something called a SLAPP lawsuit, which is using, if you want a civil level, litigation to bankrupt, if you will, the opposition to social ills. Here, what you've effectively done is taken it one step further. SLAPP lawsuits, by the way, are illegal in many states, including Rhode Island. Now what you've done is essentially weaponized the criminal justice system here in the state, if I can use that term, justice.
When the criminal justice system is weaponized.
Right. You've literally weaponized it based on not just the political interpretation, if you will, of a state's attorney general or a local prosecutor, but literally they have free reign. We always talk about what can happen in the grand jury. They've literally got free reign to exercise their own moral judgment on a group of individuals who are engaged in a consensual, harm-free relationship, isn't it? So what happens is ultimately just the fear of retribution at that level, and even one engagement can effectively bankrupt an organization who is simply engaging, ironically in their terms, what should be considered Christ-like behavior. We really saw evidence
of the overreaching power of law enforcement in the massage parlor stings in South Florida. They actually used a Patriot Act thing to get. They went in and they said that they suspected this massage parlor of having this international ties to terrorists, and so they needed to have it surveilled. So they called in a bomb threat, went in and installed cameras in all of these different massage rooms, right, using something from the Patriot Act, and what turned out to be nothing more than simple sex work, simple consensual sex work.
Right, and quite frankly, the only reason
giving government the power to overreach and overuse a remedy, it's real.
Right, and on top of that, the irony of some of the most powerful people in the nation literally being caught up in the net, and yet every legal protection that was available, every legal stretch, every legal trick that could be brought to bear to make sure that a NFL owner, the videotape which is in the possession of law enforcement, would not be brought to light. Right. Yet at the same time, the real victims here are the women of that parlor, of a small retail storefront in the south of Florida, who showed up one day to react to an act that is in overwhelming consumer demand. In the free markets, sex work goes away if there's no demand. if folks aren't willing to line up and pay for this.
That's not actually true. And I think that it's really important that people understand that these end demand tactics, they really don't end demand. What they do is they make it more dangerous. When there are clients, there are, sex workers are willing to engage in riskier behavior and become more at risk for violence in those kinds of situations.
Right. Now, what I was trying to point out was that you've clearly, much like drugs, and why drugs should be completely legalized, the scenarios that they're trying to attack are created, in a sense, because there's consistent call as consumers for the products. Now, how they can then try to conflate that and turn that into a completely different scenario is part of the unique evil of the American judicial system. But
that's one of the things that I think is really an important note. Is we don't want to have sex work legalized. We want to have it decriminalized.
Right.
The move to legalize marijuana has really all it's done is it's allowed the privileged few to own these marijuana companies and then to do what people are now in prison for, at this time, and they're not getting released. So we want to remove the criminal and civil penalties for the one-on-one transaction of sex.
Right.
One buyer, one seller, no penalty.
Right.
No criminal penalty, no civil penalty. And that's a very important distinction. Legalization actually raises the barriers to get into sex work and actually makes the charge more. It requires the sex worker to go down to the sheriff's office, get fingerprinted, register as a sex worker, and that license is going to follow her around for the rest of her life. Even if she goes off to college and becomes a brain surgeon, she's still going to be known as the sex worker who's also a brain surgeon.
Right. And you're talking about impacts on everything from student loans to subsidized housing, towards any one of the number of government services that other people enjoy.
Even just renting an apartment is difficult to do with a prostitution charge.
Right. So not only do we then marginalize people, not only then we put them in positions where they're being hunted, not only do we then incarcerate them, not only do we treat them brutally when they're incarcerated, offer them no real redemption with a record tracking them for life, engagement in the practice in and of itself will impact their ability to pursue the much vaunted civilian life that all these federally subsidized and locally subsidized organizations proclaim to want for them. It really is a trap, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a dangerous place to be. It's quicksand.
Is there a move afoot at all, perhaps because it's a presidential election year, because of the pressure being brought to hypocritical, and I'm a libertarian, so I can't help but take a cheap shot at overly moralistic Republicans and hypocritical, allegedly feminist liberal senators. Is there any move afoot to modify the legislation, repeal the legislation?
Well, Pat, all the really smart people are libertarians. Sex work is getting a lot of exposure. People are starting to get suspicious about all of these claims about human trafficking.
Right.
I mean, you can't possibly believe everything you see on TV. People were very surprised to learn that the women from the massage parlor absolutely refused to admit to being victims. They absolutely insisted that they were there of their own volition.
Right.
And that, I think, is starting to become more and more a part of the conversation, is the fact that there's a spectrum of consent. There are people who readily and willingly and with full knowledge enter the sex industry, and there are people who are the exact opposite. Right there in the middle is that big gray space, where I call it the viminal space, where if you choose to be victimized, then you're not criminalized. If you choose to be criminalized, then you become victimized. I mean, it's a very, very dark, scary rabbit hole.
What type of resources do you need to make your mission? And it is a mission.
Yeah,
Easier.
we need money and we need access. We need the Libertarian Convention that's taking place in Austin to support sex workers in getting there and in having a voice. We do have an organization that is going to be there and they're going to have a table, but we need more. We need sex workers to be there. We need to be able to fund sex workers going to events where policies and programs are being created that impact their lives. Talking about the HIV, the International AIDS Conference that's taking place in San Francisco. I'm talking about the HIV is not a crime that's taking place in North Carolina. I'm talking about the Libertarian National Convention that's taking place in Austin. I'm talking about South by Southwest that's taking place in Austin. I'm talking about all the organizations and all of the things that are being done. Sex workers need access to be able to go to those places and share their lived experience so that we can better create programs and policies that actually meet needs as opposed to just squandering $11 million on a call center.
Right. How can folks donate to you? How can folks reach out to you? What do you have on the web that you can share with them? I know we've shared a number of pages, but give us the
Definitely.
lowdown.
Go to our website, www.swop SWOP Behind Bars. You can donate money. There is a list of 10 things you can do to support incarcerated sex workers. Become a pen pal. Get to know someone who's behind bars and has engaged in the sex trade. You can purchase Amazon. You can purchase books for Amazon wish list. You can donate to our scholarship fund so that we're able to provide more for our legal scholarships. You can donate to help us put together these care packages for women who are released back into the community with nothing more than a bus ticket and $50 Visa gift card. And you can invite us to speak at your conferences and at your events, and ask us to tell you why decriminalization matters and why it's an important subject and why it's important to recognize sex workers as experts in their own lives.
In so many situations, and it's a point we routinely make on the coalition, so many situations have become, I'll use the word normalized. Relationships have become normalized.
Yeah.
Because folks finally come to understand that this is not some remote community of whom they have no connection to. This is not some group of people out on the sidelines somewhere of life. These are folks who are your family members, people you play a softball league, maybe someone you used to work with that became involved in sex work. These are regular people. And
I'd like to challenge every one of your listeners to recognize that someone they love is a sex worker. Someone you care about is a sex worker. Are you a safe place for them to disclose? Are you a safe place for them to go to if they should get into trouble and to need your assistance? Really look inside yourself and make a determination. Are you really willing to set aside your judgment and your disdain for a profession that maybe you don't morally approve of in order to make sure that an individual has the resources they need to get the things that make their life living? Someone you love is a sex worker. Are you a safe place?
It's a great question. And I think everyone would like to think that they are, but I think folks need to reflect, and this, again, gets back to the purpose of December 17th, that they need to reflect on just exactly how they would react. In much the same way that society used to frown on homosexuality, how would you react if all of a sudden your son or daughter came out to you? For folks who are suffering, from mental illnesses, how would you react if you found out that someone that you work with, is on medication, is suffering from those type of challenges? Once we as a society decided not to disparage those folks, marginalize them, but to embrace folks, you achieved a level of normality, you achieved a level of support and care, and quite frankly, love. And this is, of course, the season of love, right? You achieved that when you understood and made yourself face these basic human truths. And that's probably the missing ingredient here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It just takes a lot of self-reflection and a lot of self-discovery and a lot of understanding that, what are you going to do if someone, if someone comes to you and says, listen, I'm in trouble. I need help. Are you going to be willing to help them? Or are you going to say, well, only if you decide never to do sex work again?
Right. And ultimately, let's be blunt, much like those situations maybe a few years ago that I just discussed, for someone to come to you in a moment of crisis, given all the challenges that we've discussed in this hour, then there's a level of desperation and a need for support that is critical. So you have to prepare yourself as an adult when opportunities like this come up to discuss this issue in advance. Because that one chance, we've seen in so many occasions of tragedy where folks have not reacted and ultimately took with them for the rest of their lives their failure to not be prepared to support someone that they love for an act or an engagement that, quite frankly, has no place whatsoever in our criminal justice system, has no place being judged on some high moral level that, in fact, the people who sit in judgment of could never fully possess themselves. It's up to us right now, to take an observance like this week, channel it, educate yourself, and grow. And that's, if anything comes from all of the losses, the tragedies of the past few years, if anything good comes from it, maybe it's times like this where we take the opportunity to recognize the humanity within ourselves and understand that folks are in crisis. We need to reach out. We need to do it before that critical moment comes, if possible.
And we can do it. I know we can.
How can folks reach out to you? Give us the whole list of websites, Facebook pages. You're everywhere.
We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on Twitter. We're a lot on Twitter. I feel guilty about that. Our website is www.swapbehindbars.org. You can reach us on the community support line at 877-776-2004, extension 1. If you'd like to reach me personally and talk about a to an event or a conference, you can reach us at alex@swapusa.org, and we'll look forward to talking with you another time.
Great, and I hope I can see, and let's talk offline about the folks that are coming to Austin. If there's a way that I know that the wing of the Libertarian group that I'm involved in would love to find ways that we can help and support folks make a presence in Austin at the Libertarian National Convention, and really anywhere libertarians are. So we'll certainly talk about that offline.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much.
Alex, have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas, whatever tradition you personally observe. Give our best to folks in the community and understand that, well, times really are changing, and it's up to all of us to facilitate that.
Right to the occasion.
All right, buddy. Alex Andrews, of course, Swap Behind Bars. That's the sex worker outreach project. She's involved in the day-to-day support network, harm reduction, if you will, to folks who find themselves incarcerated, regardless of the reasons, if you will, what prompted them to become entangled with our quote-unquote judicial system. At the same time, recognizing the percentage of folks there who have experienced or been part of the sex worker community. And literally performing graces that a multi-billion-dollar federal government seems incapable of, if not only being the cause that they're there in the first place. We're going to take a quick break right now. Bella Robinson is going to be dialing in just a second on a local basis. Talk about Rhode Island. Alex, thank you so much. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network. We'll be right back.